There.
Welcome, folks. You are in the right place for the Gallier Gathering lecture tonight. We're going to give it a few minutes for everyone to log on, but we'll get started no later than 6:05 Central Time.
So you can see people coming in. Can they see us?
Yeah, I can see a list of names of folks as they log in. We just hit 6 o'clock, so I think we'll see more people trickling in now that it's the official start time. Yep.
And will they see us? I'll wave if they can see us.
Yep, they can see us and hear us. Welcome everyone who's logging on. You're in the right place for the Gallier Gathering lecture this evening. We're going to give it a few minutes for people to log in, get settled, but we'll get started no later than 6:05 p.m. Central Time.
Hi, Susan. Susan can see us and hear us. No, I can't see you. You can see us, so you know that we are live.
Yeah, we have it on webinar formatting so that we don't run into any video streaming bandwidth issues. So the only videos going will be mine and our speaker tonight's. But I can see all the participants on the side. And for everyone who's logging on, you can put comments in the chat, and there's also a Q&A function that we ask that you use at the end to submit any questions for the Q&A. Welcome, folks. I'm continuing to see people log on. You're in the right place for the Gallier Gathering lecture. We're going to give it a couple more minutes to let people log on, but we'll get started no later than 6:05. Well, it seems like the logons have slowed down, so maybe we can get started and everyone else can catch catch what they've missed on the video up on YouTube tomorrow. So good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Amy Catherine Medvick. I am the Director of Educational Programming here at Hermann-Grima and Gallier Historic Houses. For those who are new, Hermann-Grima and Gallier Historic Houses, managed by the Women's Exchange, preserves two 19th century New Orleans homes, and through their architecture, collections, and history, inspires discourse about our collective past and its relevance to our present and future. We invite you to come visit us the next time that you are in the French Quarter. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening. Fatima Shaik is the author of 7 books, most recently Economy Hall, The Hidden History of a Free Black Brotherhood, winner of the American Book Award and the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities 2022 Book of the Year. Shaik received the Louisiana Writer Award in 2021. She has written for the Southern Review, Callaloo, Tribes, The Root, In These Times, and the New York Times. She is the recipient of grants from the NEH, LEH, and the Kittredge Fund. Shaik retired in 2020 as assistant professor from St. Peter's University, where she founded its communication program, now the Communication and Media Culture Department. She is former board member of the Writers' Room and PEN America. The subject of tonight's talk, the Société d'économie et d'assistance mutuelle, Economy and Mutual Aid Association, lasted from 1836 to the late 1940s or early 1950s. The society was the most important organization begun by free people of color in the South due to its longevity, international reach, and the prominence of its members. In this evening's lecture, Shaik will highlight some of the economy members, the society's activities, and their descendants. As I mentioned, we will have a Q&A at the end of the lecture. Please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions that you have, and you can submit them as the lecture goes, and then we can address them at the end. And now let's hand things over to Fatima Shaik.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you to everyone for being here. I'm happy to speak always about the Economy Society and Economy Hall. What I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes. I'll share my screen with you to show you some photographs that will explain a little bit more about the Economy Society and Economy Hall. And I will start with this first one. Let's look here. Let's share my screen. Okay, we'll start right here. We'll start here because you may have seen this on the invitation for tonight's gathering. This is what they call a diploma at the society, and basically it says that the undersigned person is a member of the Société d'économie et d'assistance mutuelle. It was a benevolent association, and more than that, when I began researching it, and I started researching this in around 1997, I found out over that long period of time that this was probably the most important organization in the South of free people of color. And that was because of its international reach, its antebellum wealth, its cultural influence, and its longevity. Uh, with regard to its longevity, I'm sure most of you in the audience have gone to the Jazz and Heritage Festival, or you've heard of the Jazz and Heritage Festival, and you've probably heard of Economy Hall at the Jazz and Heritage Festival. Most people don't know that that Economy Hall, the Economy Hall tent at the Jazz Festival, was named after Economy Hall, which was begun by the society, the Economy Society in 1836. The hall was built in 1857, which we will get to in a minute. But the longevity that it has, the fact that it's still touching us today, I think is significant. There were 15 original founders. We'll take a look at the hall itself. There were 15 original founders in the Economy Society, or the Société d'économie. They were French speakers with ancestral roots in Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, and Central America. From the creation of the organization to its demise in the early 1950s and late 1940s, the men of the economy were characterized locally as Creoles due to their language and cultural traditions, which were the hybrid of African, indigenous, and European foodways and family practices, or because of their ancestries dating from French and Spanish colonial Louisiana. The U.S. Census and newspapers designated them racially as colored people, Negroes, and Blacks. The economy members served in the Battle of New Orleans, in the Civil War, and died in the New Orleans Massacre, in the commonly named Battle of Liberty Place. Members registered voters, worked in the Reconstruction government and post-Reconstruction politics, and much more. So what we'll look at right now are some of the things they were involved in and who they were. So who were the Economy Society members? They were people who were inspired by the Haitian Revolution, and they were Louisiana natives with roots in Africa, Europe, North and South America. What was interesting about this group was that they were French speakers who came from different parts of the world and then settled in New Orleans and made friendships, or in some cases had relations with people who were already here. One of the things that they had in the society was a library. So now, if you think about this, they had a library. Their library started in around 1836, and their library consisted of books that were bought in Paris by one of their members. And in one of the books, this atlas that they mention in one of the first journals is this map of the United States. So you have to consider that these people were very literate, very experienced about the world. And when you see, this was a map of 1825 that showed the United States uh, written in French, and this is what they consulted. They had maps of the atlas was World Atlas, so it had maps from all around the world. They also had books about Haiti, and I will show you that in a minute, and about France, and mathematics books, and all sorts of things, science books. Here's another one of the books that they had, and I'm showing you these books to show you how rooted they were in the Haitian Revolution. This is a book. This is actually the book, the back cover of a book that is called Pétion Haiti. Pétion and Haiti. Pétion, Alexander Pétion, was one of the revolutionaries, one of the men in the Haitian Revolutionary. Haitian Revolution. He was the first president of Haiti. He was he led troops to alongside. Well, I don't know about physically alongside, but we hear about Toussaint Louverture. Pétion was one of the other people who worked in the Haitian Revolution, or who led the Haitian Revolution. He was the leader of the mulatto faction. In any case, this book was written about the life of Pétion, and it was written by a Black man who lived in Paris. As you can see, one of the books that was recommended on the back cover of Pétion Haiti was a book about Toussaint Louverture. So it's not that these men were inexperienced or didn't know anything about history or any other parts of the world. They were very knowledgeable about other parts of the world, and you have to think that this was in the 1830s. There were 15 members. This is the signature of a document that they produced when they first decided to join each other. There were 15 members of the Economy Society, and among them were Pierre Crocker, who was the first president, Charles Martinez, who was a musician and a grocer. His name is mentioned in James Monroe Trotter's Music and Some Highly Musical People. Manuel Moreau, who is a Battle of New Orleans veteran, and many other people whose names you might be familiar with. Etienne Codeviol, Tommy Romain, Francois Corlon, Pierre Duhart, some people who are mentioned in some of the other books around New Orleans. In fact, I found lots of books where these men were named for different attributes. So Charles Martinez was in James Monroe Trotter's book. Pierre Crocker and Etienne Codeviol and Charles Martinez are mentioned in some of the architecture books because they own property. Pierre Crocker, in fact, was also mentioned in some of the books, is also mentioned in some books about Marie Laveau, because Pierre Crocker's mistress was Marie Laveau's daughter, Heloise. Just here's another example of the economy's literacy. I think that by looking at this, you can see that these men were very skilled artistically and had a classical education. I call it their logo. This was drawn by Ludger Boguille, and Ludger Boguille is a subject of my book. He's the protagonist, if you will, in my book, Economy Hall, The Hidden History of a Free Black Brotherhood, because the Boguille family goes back to Haiti. His mother and his father came from Haiti. His father was probably involved in the Haitian Revolution when he was a teenager. His mother came into New Orleans and moved into the moved into the Marigny. She lived there, and Boguille was raised in the Marigny, and he was a poet who got more and more radical as time went on in the course of the 19th century. He lived until 1892. He was born in 1812, so he really lived a long time through the 19th century, and that book was able to tell you about the things he went through and the things that the society went through in the 19th century. But when he became secretary of the organization, he was very flamboyant. You could tell by his handwriting, and this is one of the things that he produced. Here again, you can see this is Boguille's taking the minutes. The list of members who attended this meeting, there's a list of 50 names. So these are the people who were in attendance in 1872. So if you want to see this, in fact, these documents that I'm showing you tonight are in an exhibit at Xavier University of Louisiana right now in their university center on the second floor. So if you'd like to take a closer look at this, they're up at Xavier University right now. You can see them. But this will show you some of the names of the people. Let me see that were there. No, I thought I may have given you a detail, but no, I didn't. I didn't. But Jules Dejean was the president at that time. Azaretto, Desmazinine Azaretto was the vice president. Boguille was the secretary. Benjamin Xavier was the second secretary. Um, you can look and see the names, but if you're from New Orleans, or if you're familiar with New Orleans history at all, you'll recognize a lot of these names in various places. In fact, you'll recognize these names in New Orleans. The Boguilles still live in New Orleans. Oops, let me see, I'm going backwards, sorry. Go forward. Okay, who were the society members? These were people, because of their roots in Haiti, I found that they were people with liberation philosophies. The Haitians came in to help the American Revolution. So, and they also came to help the Battle of New Orleans. There were many free people of color who came into the Battle of New Orleans to help win it, and did win it. And their descendants are still living in New Orleans now. Here is Pétion. Here's an illustration of Pétion by Saint-Remy, and it is in that book that I was telling you about. This is a book that was in the library of the Economy Society, and it stayed in the hall. It stayed in the hall. These books stayed in the hall until the hall was destroyed by Hurricane Betsy. The hall had been in existence from 1857 till the hurricanes. And then at that time, well, in the 1840s, the hall was sold to a church, and after that, the hall was emptied. After the church was there, the hall wasn't emptied yet of the books. After the church was there for a little while, a hurricane came. The hall was emptied of the books, and part of this library came down. Well, basically came down to me. My father's friend was one of the last members of the Economy Society itself, and they were getting rid of the furniture that was in the hall. Nobody wanted the books that were in there. They were old books. They were kind of beat up, and and my dad said he'd take them. So they sat in my house for about 50 years before I began writing Economy Hall, my book. And I based it on the journals and the Library of the Economy Society and on the research that I did finding out who these people were. Where else we have? I just thought you'd like to see. This is part of the exhibit that's up at Xavier. These are some of the descendants of the people who were in Economy Hall. The people, the three men on with the one seated, are Moores and Bart families. They're descended from Engel Bart, and Engel Bart was a man who came from Maine to be in the Battle of New Orleans, and he was an economy member. And I know so much about Engelbart because there was his obituary basically was written in one of the journals, and he was one of the people who the Economy Society really admired because they called him one of their forthright brothers. Those are Engelbart's descendants. The men who are standing in front of the American flags are descendants of Civil War soldiers. Ernest Bloch, um, and the Ray brothers, Octave and Henry Louis Ray. Henry Louis Ray was a very outspoken member of the Native Guards. The Native Guards were a Union unit in the Civil War that was formed in New Orleans, and he out. I say outspoken because you can read quotes from him that are in the New York Times and or that are in other books. Karen Kose Bell has written about him. So has Melissa Daggett. They've both written about Henry Louis Ray. Uh, Daggett's book is about the spirituality of Ray because he was a spiritualist, and I'll let her explain that when you tune into one of her podcasts or videos. You can see how much spiritualism took place and was a part of Economy Hall. Actually, the spiritualists met in Economy Hall once a week. This is Snare. What I can't remember his name right now, but he was one of the another one of the Native Guards who who gave a dance in the Economy Hall. One of the things that kept the Economy Hall going, and one of the things that the people in this mutual aid and benevolent society did, was take care of the people in their community. You know, when you talk about a benevolent society or a mutual aid society, uh, of which this was both, you they take care of people by helping the widows when one of their members dies. The men of the society uh, give money to the widow, try to take care of the children. They also take care of poor people who are in their community. There were often things like they were giving money to like a blind man on the corner, or someone who was a single woman, or people who could not take care of themselves at that time. One of the ways that they did it, and what Snare did, I think he's a relative of Samuel Snare, who was the composer. Um, One of the things that they did was they gave dances, and this gentleman here gave a dance at the Economy Hall. They would give dances, and as we'll see later on, or as you will probably know from the history of the Economy Hall tent at the Jazz and Heritage Festival, is that these dances had jazz musicians. Later on, by the turn of the century, the people who were playing for these dances were jazz musicians from the community who became some of the earliest innovators of jazz. So, but this is the time of the Civil War, so this dance was to help someone in the community. Francois Boisderet Fils, which is the son of Francois Boisderet, um, was one of the presidents of the Economy Society, but at this time he was a member. He had just finished being a volunteer in the Civil War. Um, at this time, the men in the Economy Hall were talking about suffrage, and they were fighting for voting rights. You saw a lot of marches, you saw a lot of gatherings in the Economy Hall and in other places with other organizations that the Friends of Universal Suffrage, for example, um, who wanted the vote for men of African descent. They did not make a distinction whether these men of African descent were free or not free before the Civil War. If you look at Karen Kose Bell's book, she will explain that there was a sort of political negotiation that went on, so that at first they were there for everyone, and then they were told that if they politically just said men who were free before the Civil War and who had property, then they would probably have a chance to get that vote for blacks even quicker. Didn't happen that way, but that, I know there's some controversy about, who did they want the vote for. The people in the Economic Society wanted the vote for everyone. They were friends of they were, many of them were members of the Friends of Universal Suffrage. Boiteray, this particular gentleman who was a second generation Economy Society member, was a grand son of a slave. Ingrid Stanley, who's one of the members of La Creole, who does the journal for La Creole Research Association. Ingrid Stanley has done a lot of research on this fella, and maybe one of the descendants. And she told me that his father was purchased. Boiteray's father was purchased by his mother, who was enslaved. So she earned enough money to buy her son, and then the Boiterays themselves became very successful and very rich, and I do believe they too are living in New Orleans right now. Perhaps you can see this reunion of the natives. This is the native guards, and they're all coming to the Society Hall, to the salle. I don't know if you can see it right in the middle, salle d'économie, right? And there is for l'émancipation des esclaves. Now, excuse my French, everybody who can really speak French, but the emancipation of the slaves. Who are the economy members? Here's another place where you can see some actual names of the people. These are the people who were. You may recognize these names from New Orleans. You may even be related to many of them. The mayors, the Poirets, Charles Butler, the Chavards, uh, Cannonage. Cannonage was one of Boguille's stepchildren. I think there's a Cannonage. There are two lines of Cannonage, so you might want to look into both of them. But I know Cannonage children were the Boguille's stepchildren because he married the mother of the Cannonage children. Um, Samuel Delane, Dr. Smith. You'll see that at this time, this is members of the Native Guards, members of the Economy Society, and members of other organizations. But the mayors, the Poirets, Butler, Chavard, Cannonage, Boguille, they were all economy members. They met with other organizations, so they were not, as people sometimes think, oh, they were, these Creoles were people who were so elite. Yes, there were some people who were very elite and stayed to themselves, but the men in the Economy Society were friends with and did integrate with many other groups um, in order to get suffrage, in order to get many of the rights. They marched with them, and you'll see a lot of back and forth between them and lots of other communities in New Orleans. And in fact, one of the reasons that I think Economy Hall as a jazz place is so important and so well known is because everybody came to Economy Hall. The doors were open to everyone. This is uh, the program that they had about the celebration of emancipation. So if you think that, well, do think that emancipation was quite celebrated in New Orleans. Um, there were many people who were supported it, who came out for it. As you can see, if you look on the smaller piece of paper, you look at the small, Ludger Boguille was the Grand Marshal of the day. At that time, he was also the Secretary of the Economy Society. Um, there were all of the societies in New Orleans. School children came out, soldiers came out, the government officials. It took place in Congo Square. There was a huge celebration. There was a huge march, and there were fire bells rung all over the city. If you look in my book, and there are many other places, I think Keith Medley's book also talks about it. But there were lots of places in New Orleans that celebrated emancipation when it finally came. Who were the Economy Society members? Who were the day-to-day members? Here are a couple of examples. There were working men, and there were women, sort of middle class women, right? So middle class was working people in those days. The cigar makers. Uh, Lots of economy members were cigar makers. There were cigar makers and shoemakers. There were people in real estate, people in construction. There were business owners. I think Tommy Romaine was a hairdresser. There were people who had businesses, and in fact, um, there was one point at which the president was advising the people in the society on how to behave, how to carry themselves, and they said that they should behave as a well-bred carpenter, like someone with good manners and very polite to others. So this is a cigar makers that met at the Economy Hall. Um, and this was, you can see some of the names, Elliot, Dedune, Labastray, Bacchus. Those are, if you're from the Seventh Ward, you know all of those names. Or if you've been to Xavier, you know those names. Here's the name, whether you don't have to be from the Seventh Ward or from Xavier or from that downtown group to know this name. If you're anywhere uh, in the literati of the United States, you should know Alice Ruth Moore Dunbar, right? Nelson, Alice Ruth Moore Dunbar Nelson. She was the New Orleans, the only New Orleans writer that was in the Harlem Renaissance. And I know you've heard of the Harlem Renaissance. Um, Alice Ruth Moore Dunbar Nelson um, came to Economy Hall. She came to Economy Hall to read for the society group. And the society groups, is that there's some interesting research done on these society women. There were societies of the societies were segregated. The black women were not allowed to get into the white societies, right? So they had society groups. So they had literature groups and music groups and all sorts of groups. Well, this was a society group in New Orleans called the Jefferson Dramatic Club, and they read Alice Ruth Moore Dunbar Nelson's uh, play, who was that took place in Economy Hall, and you can see some of these names. These are not downtown New Orleans names. These are Phyllis and Johnson and Rigo. So you can see everybody came. Who else were the society members? Who else were the society members? Morticians and social relations. Um, you'll find that there were a lot of people, because the society started off as this mutual aid and benevolent society, right? Um, they took care of their members at the time of burial. Think about this. This was long before you had funeral homes taking care of Black people. What people did was they had needed somebody to take care of the body, to sit with the body overnight, to bury the body, right? So the man that you're looking at right here is Charles Charbonnet. And this is Charles Charbonnet, who is the ancestor of the Charbonnets that own the Charbonnet Funeral Home right now. This is a letter that he responded to from Mrs. Rivard, Aristide Rivard's widow. Aristide Rivard was a member of the Economy Society. I think the Rivards are probably in New Orleans still. Um, Rivard passed away, and at this time, his wife had children, and she needed help. So she wrote a long letter to the society, which is, you can read it at length in at the Xavier exhibit. It's in the Xavier exhibit. You can read it at length. But she is basically saying, since my husband died, my children are very hungry, and we really need your assistance. So Charbonnet wrote back to her, and the men sent her money. But there was a Secours committee, right? And the Secours committee would help people out. So there was a committee that buried people. There was a committee that helped people out, and this was one of the Revard was one. Here's another family that I was really happy to meet. I met them recently. This is Nelson Moran's family. So the man in the frame is Nelson Moran, and he was a member of the Economy Society, and he also was in the funeral business. If you look at the family picture, this is this is the Casanave family. I met the Casanaves when I don't remember who got in touch with who, but I met the Casanave family, who are Hebers right now. Um, and they came in, they gave me this lovely family picture of Pierre Casanave's granddaughter and her husband. Pierre Casanave's granddaughter was part Mexican. You might see it in her face. And she married a German man, and those are her children, a sailor and a priest. And I just thought it was a fabulous picture, and it was wonderful to meet them. They didn't know about a lot of the economy history, and I didn't know about the family history. So it was just wonderful to see these people. The Rosenbergs, one lives in California and one lives in New York, and they're the descendants of Nelson Moran. So you can see that who are the Economy Society members? There were people who found a commonality in this benevolence, in this mutual aid, and there were men of African descent. And you can see that their families went out all over, went out all over the United States, went out all over the world. Cangalotti family. I got to meet the Cangalottis. Uh, the Cangalatis are all over the United States, and I was happy to meet them. Oscar Cangalotti was the president of the Economy Society also. You can see the vice president, Henry Leon, Diaz, Lambert Boissier. Y'all may know Lambert Boissier's name. I think we might be on Lambert the Third or Lambert the Fourth right now, who's in city government. But these families, there were families that went out into the world, went all over the United States, and there were families that stayed right here in New Orleans. And what I found, going back to that family of Engelbart, um, and the Moran family, and people who were in the Battle of New Orleans, people who were in the Civil War, there were many of them that stayed, and many of them that stayed are still helping their community. The Barts are firemen. The Moran family, I think she's a teacher. You'll find a lot of teachers and government people, people who are still working in their communities, helping the organizations that their ancestors founded. Oh, here we go. Here are some of the families. The family that's holding the black drape, those are the Hebers, the Charbonnets, and the Rosenbergs, who are the descendants of um, Moran. So, uh, and the Cangalotis, the picture that has the sort of orange tint to it, those are the Cangalotis when they had a family reunion. I think they had a reunion in California, but there many of them are in Chicago and some are in Texas, I believe. But it's been sort of a wonderful experience to get these descendants to find out like who were the economy members and what did they do, and then what did their families become. It's just sort of, it's been really a nice experience for me too. you know um, this is something. So I talked about Pierre Casanave a few minutes ago. Pierre Casanave's family, who the Hebers, who are now Hebers, and who I met. This is He was president in 1857, and in 1857, what was going on was the Dred Scott decision. Now, if you remember the Dred Scott decision, it was a decision made by the Supreme Court that that Dred Scott, who was an enslaved man who had been taken into a free state, was brought back by his captor into a slave state. And there was a suit to say, well, he was free. Actually, he could not be brought back and enslaved into a slave state. The Supreme Court at that time voted against him. And also in their writings said that no person of African descent would ever become a citizen of the United States. So as you can imagine, the people in the Economy Society, because not only, I'm sorry, not only did it say that no, they would never become a citizen, but that they had been doomed to slavery by their ancestry and by their color. That is what, if you look it up, that's what you'll see in the decision of the Supreme Court. So the men of the Economy Society obviously freaked out. Um, they knew, for example, that they were not doomed to slavery. Some of them had been enslaved, some of them had never been enslaved. They had all become quite successful. They had businesses. They couldn't see why they couldn't even vote. So to be told that they would never become citizens was an insult. So Pierre Casanave at this time gave a big speech to his members, and one of the things he said was, "Let us prove to the world that we do not deserve to be diminished by the senseless prejudice that seeks to demoralize us only because of this African blood that runs in our veins. There it is, all our crime." So they were just offended, insulted, and angry that this happened. Not only did that happen, but of course we went into the Civil War because of slavery. Um, as I was telling you now, so I'm skipping a few years now. I'm going to skip over the Civil War because that's a whole Zoom lecture in itself. And I will refer you to Karen Cosey Bell. She does a wonderful job of that. I'll refer you to my book. I do a pretty good job of it myself, talking about all of the machinations that went on during the Civil War. But and there were many members of the economy who volunteered in the Civil War, um, and then and also who either died or were hurt in the massacre of 1866. Okay, so there was the New Orleans massacre. After the Civil War, there was the New Orleans massacre. After the Civil War, in the Union won, um, the Louisiana was not a state anymore. While Louisiana was not a state, uh, the men of color were saying, okay, it's not a state anymore. So when it becomes a state, it's time for us to vote, right? Um, there was a lot of discussion about that, and they didn't get it. They went to a convention. Some of them went to a convention in 1866 to talk some more about why they should get the vote. There was at the convention, there were a group of policemen and firemen and citizens of New Orleans who came to the building with guns and just started shooting everybody and killing everybody. You may not have learned this in your history books. It was news to me when I read it. There was a huge massacre in New Orleans in 1866 of defenseless people who were in a building trying to meet for the vote. Ludger Boguille was one of those people. So he was the secretary of the Economy Society. He was in that building at that time. Um, what happened after that was that people did get the vote. In anticipation of getting the vote, while they were talking about whether they could get the vote or not, the Friends of Universal Suffrage did a mock election, right? Before everyone got the vote, they did a mock election to see if there was the vote, um, how many Black people would be voting. In Economy Hall, people came to vote. Just like people go to the corner or go to some place a voting poll, they came to Economy Hall. There were about 7 places in New Orleans where people went, including Algiers, and Economy Hall was one of them. If you can see here that Ludger Boguille was one of the registrars of voters at that time. So what you're looking at right here is a document of someone who would, when the vote became totally legal, who would vote and who wanted to vote, a Black person who wanted to vote. So I'm showing you this because this happened in 1865. Actually, this was before the massacre. This was 5 years before the federal government put the voting rights in the Constitution. So, when I talk to you about how people had this liberation philosophy and this revolutionary philosophy and this idea of equality, all the way from the Haitian Revolution. This is where it was put into action. I mean, it was put into action all the way along, but this is one of the places where you can see concretely that they were voting 5 years before the United States even recognized it, or they were trying to vote. Okay. And in fact, you can read this. This was in the New Orleans Tribune newspaper. The New Orleans Tribune newspaper was a very radical newspaper. You can read Mark Rudenay's blog, Rudenay History. I believe it's Rudenay History and Culture, but it might be, but Mark Rudenay, Roudenez. Look for that name when you Google it. And you will see all of his writings about the Tribune newspaper. The Tribune newspaper was the first daily Black newspaper in America, of course, in New Orleans. It started in New Orleans, and it wrote about Economy Hall, and it said that Economy Hall uh, kept the doors of its hall open for meetings, to say nothing of its acts of generosity on its part toward other benevolent societies and orphans. They thought that it was just like any of the other halls of freedom in the United States. Keep going. Who else were people who were in the Economy Hall? That's a picture of Rudenay's ancestor right there, who's the publisher, the fellow who has on the jacket and his hand in the jacket. Um, he was a he was the publisher of the New Orleans Tribune, uh, and he wrote some very radical essays that you should read. Go to Mark Rudenay's website and read it. Um, when uh, people did finally get the vote, there was a convention. Oh, this was in 1865. Actually, we're still before the vote. In 1865, there was a convention of the uh, Louisiana Republican Party, the Louisiana Republican Party, which was the radical Republicans, or called the Black Republicans by the newspapers. It's a sort of derisive, a derisive phrase. Um, they met in Economy Hall. So it was the Friends of Universal Suffrage, who are the people who I was telling you about before, who wanted everybody to vote. There were other groups that had met in Economy Hall that came there, and together they formed the Republican Party of Louisiana. It was created in Economy Hall. At the bottom of that frame is Oscar Dunn, who was at the convention also, and he became the lieutenant governor of the state of Louisiana. And the man who is standing is Walter Cohen, who became the president of the Economy Society for about 30 years, and he was very active in government himself. So you could see this sort of line through from the Haitian Revolution, the French Revolution, all the way through to the radical politics that existed in the later half of the 19th century. So after that, where did things go? There was Reconstruction. Many of the people in the Economy Hall were active in Reconstruction. And during Reconstruction, one of the ways that people were encouraged to vote, encouraged to use their rights, was to go to dances and marches. So what I saw when I was reading it was in the 1870s that the Economy Society wrote that they were not going to have any marches, any funerals, any major events without a band. They said that a brass band had to be included in all of their major outings, and that they talked about how much they were going to pay the orchestra that would come. So they started marching. You would see, if you look in some of these primary documents, you'll see hundreds of people marching with a brass band at the head. And these same brass bands that marched for during Reconstruction became some of the bands that were orchestras that maybe were a little less brassy, and came inside the Economy Hall and started playing, becoming your jazz bands. So at the top you'll see uh, the Veen, Jean Veen in a brass band. You'll see Piron, Myrtil Piron's nephew down there, A.J. Piron, in his orchestra. Um, You'll see William Nickerson, that sort of oval picture over there. William Nickerson was the father of Camille Nickerson, who created the B Sharp Club in New Orleans, who my parents were a part of. So I saw this musical line running from Economy Hall right down through my family. Um, Nickerson also, William Nickerson, the father, also taught many of the early jazz musicians. So there were if you know your jazz history a little bit, most of y'all probably do. There were reading musicians and there were sort of ear musicians that played by ear. Nickerson taught a lot of the reading musicians that helped create jazz. And down here is Leonard Bechet, who was a member also of Economy Hall. He was also an economy member. He is Sidney Bechet's brother. Sidney Bechet, if uh, you probably know your jazz history, Sidney Bechet was a famous musician who played across France and is well known coming from New Orleans. This poster here from 1909 was a time when Walter Cohen was the president of the Economy Society. And you can see that at that point, they're starting to use English and French, grand soirée dansant. Um, and it's for a charitable cause, because most of them were for charitable causes. Um, and it's happening at Economy Hall, and you're listening to jazz. So you'll see how all of this stuff had its roots in the Economy Society, branched out into jazz, and this is what we know about Economy Hall right now. We know it for jazz. This is a picture. October of last year, maybe year before last. I'd have to think about it. But that I got together all of the descendants that I could find that could show up on one day and take a picture in front of Xavier University, which is where Xavier University had offered to, let us use their steps and let us use their gallery to hang the photos. It is hanging in the student center right now. But here are all of the descendants, and you can see a varied lot. Um, of descendants of Civil War people and Battle of New Orleans people, and like Ron Bechet up there is up there in the corner, the descendant of the musicians. So this is what Economy Hall looks like. The people of Economy Hall look like today, the descendants, and now I hope you've seen a little bit about who they were in the very beginning. So that's if you want more information, you can go to economyhall.com. I have listings of groups that met in Economy Hall and the names of members of the Economy Society. And you can also go to fatimashake.com and just learn about the work that I've done before. That's it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We can move on to the Q&A. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so people can kind of see your face better while we're doing questions?
Yep.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Are we done?
And thank you for such a fantastic talk. Fascinating. And so such a place that's so central to so many parts of New Orleans history. It's really amazing. So first question that I have for you, I was curious, what factors do you think were the most important in allowing such a radical organization to develop?
Well, I think that literacy, for one thing, there was a similar to what is going on today. There was a movement to suspend literacy for certain people. We know that the enslaved were not allowed to read. So everybody knew that literacy was the means to self-actualization, right? So the fact that all of these men had been in school or had been taught privately. For example, I didn't mention with Ludger Boguille, but I wanted to tell you that in 1840s he had a private school. He was already teaching in the 1840s. So he had probably been taught by a private tutor. By the 1840s, I saw in one of the census records that he already had 20 students in his school in Marigny. So literacy was one, and then this tradition from Haiti. You know, they were literate enough to know that the French Revolution had happened. Right? They were quite aware of the French Revolution. They were also aware of the revolution that had taken place in Haiti. They were aware of it, and so they were aware of the American Revolution. So if you've got that sense of what's going on in the world, right? If you know what's going on in the world, you're going to say, well, what about me? You know, why are my people not free? So I think that was one of the reasons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have another question. It's another of my own, just while people are maybe thinking and submitting your questions. Just a reminder to everyone that you can put your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom. But I was curious if you could elaborate more on the role of the Native Guard for those who might not be familiar with that part of
Okay.
history.
So the Native Guard was a volunteer organization. So let me just say this: there were two versions of the Native Guards, right? There was a militia that joined the Confederacy, and the economy members joined the Confederacy first, and then a few months after they joined the Confederacy, they joined the Union. Everybody said, "What does that mean, right? What is going on?"
Yeah.
That's why I didn't go into that because it's such a long history. What I read was when I started reading the primary documents, any man who lived in New Orleans who did not take up in defense of the Confederacy would be arrested. Okay. So, what did these men, these free men, do who already had weapons? One of them was a gunsmith. Um, they said, okay, we'll join the Confederacy. There were about 1,500 men that joined the Confederacy. A number of them were in the Economy Hall. When the Union came to New Orleans in 1861 and overthrew New Orleans, right? The Confederacy ran, the Native Guard stayed, at least the militia stayed, right? The economy militia and the militias had been created. They stayed and they went to the Union people and said, listen, we're from here. We have been defending our homes the whole time. We would like to join the Union now, right? So
Yeah.
when they joined the Union, they were the first group of people of African descent that joined the Union Army, right? Or joined, and they joined in New Orleans, and they were called the Native Guards. Now, if you read my book, because you probably won't go back through these French and English primary documents, right? It took me 20 years. But if you go back, you will see that the other militias in New Orleans were derisive of them and called them natives, right? Oh, you're just natives, right? That was a kind of derisive name. You're the natives, right? Okay, you're not the real guys. You're the natives.
Mhm.
Henry Louis, not Henry, Henry Ray, said that they may call us natives, but some of our people have more white in them than the people that are in the other guards, right? In the white guards. So the Native Guards were a group of men of African descent who were very proud to be called natives and very proud to be who they were. And they were actually a little uppity. But they
Mhm.
they they fought. Some of the people fought in Port Hudson. You'll see the name Andre Callier. Andre Callier's center is now on Bayou Road in New Orleans, right off of Broad. He was a man who fought in the Native Guards at Port Hudson and actually died, gave his life for the Union side. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, it sounds like they had a lot of astute political savvy.
They were very savvy. Well, if you see this, they spoke at least two languages. They spoke English, they spoke French. Some of them spoke Spanish too, and they were traders. Like Etienne Coteviol had businesses in New Orleans and businesses in France. They had friends in Cuba, they had friends in Haiti. They had friends in Mexico, right? They were friends with the president of Mexico. At different points, they were getting information from everywhere. So
Yeah,
they were very politically astute. Yeah.
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 So we do have a question here submitted by one of the audience members. So I'm just curious, when did the Economy Society dissolve and why?
I'm not quite sure. I never did find the exact date that they dissolved, but I know when their books came into my house. Okay, so and my dad's friend was one of the members. The last document that I have is a document from 1948, which is sort of a membership document, and it's just a single document. I don't have the minutes from them, but so the books came into my house. I wasn't born until 1952. Okay, so the books came into my house maybe when I was 3 or 4 years old. So I'm thinking that around that time is when the society itself dissolved. I know
Hmm.
that it was sold to the church um, in the 18 in the 1940s, right? It was sold to the church, but it probably still had some of the things in it, or they owned the building next door too. So it either was in that hall or in the building next door that they had the books and the furniture. But I remember I actually have memory of when the books came into my house. So it probably was in the early 50s. Okay.
Okay.
Um, when the society itself dissolved. Why did it dissolve? Um, my theory is that by the 1950s, you were starting to get Black insurance companies and Black funeral homes, right?
Mm.
So, in fact, Walter Cohen, who was one of the presidents for a very long time, created an insurance company, the People's Life Insurance Company, while he was president of the Economy Society. So the People's Life Insurance Company started doing some of the things that the Benevolent Society would have done, right? When somebody dies, they would give the widow money, right? So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think that those old societies sort of outlived their purpose at that point.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, well, I have some comments that I can share, not questions, but if anyone does have any more questions, please do submit them now. Um, so one of our guests says they don't have a question, but they wanted to thank you for your amazing book and research. As a descendant and relative to a few members, it's helped them connect some dots about family history. They've shared your book with family and friends who've loved seeing the things their ancestors were doing post-Reconstruction, and proud to say that their great-grandpa and uncles were the ones from the Native Guard who went to Butler to ask to join the Union.
Good.
Your grandfather was Eugene Rapp, and his
Oh,
brothers
good.
were the Ray brothers.
Oh, great. Okay. Rap did they become Adam? Okay, the person who's rap, you could answer this in the Q&A. Were they also did they go in the tailoring business also? Okay, just answer me when you get a
Yeah,
chance.
I'll pass on the
Okay.
answer if it shows up. We do have another question. So you mentioned women at one point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, they were wondering about whether the society started admitting women at some point, or if it was closed to women, and if so, if they did admit them, when did that happen?
Um, no, it was always a men's society. There were women's auxiliaries to a lot of these societies.
Hmm.
There. I know that in the 1920s or 30s, they talked a lot about their daughters. Like their daughter, they would have a ceremony, and their daughters would be a speaker, or the daughters would be like the person who would give the flowers to somebody or something. So women were one time in the maybe in the 1880s, one of the daughters, they thanked the daughters for sewing an American flag that they hung out in front of the hall. So the
Mm-hmm.
women were active, but they were not members of the society. And you'll
Yeah.
see a lot of women's auxiliaries to other benevolent and social organizations. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very common structure. I think you see that
Hmm.
with the older crews
With the
as
old, yeah. Hmm.
well. Great. The rap descendant says Eugene was indeed a tailor, and the two of them shared the business.
Okay. Thank, thank you.
Um,
And what about in the 1960s? Wasn't there a rap that was a tailor in the 1960s? Okay, let me know.
we have time to pass that one on. There's just one more question
Okay.
up on the chat, and that's someone's curious, where on the Xavier campus is the exhibit located?
Okay. The exhibit is in the University Center on the second floor. So if you go to the University Center, um, next to the bookstore, there is just ask the people. It's to the left of the bookstore as you get off the elevators.
Okay.
Mhm.
And the rap descendant says yes, but no relation. He had only one child, and she was a girl. She became a Collins.
Okay, thank you.
Love the on the fly genealogy.
Right.
All
Thanks.
right. Well, if no one has any more questions, then I guess we'll wrap things up. On behalf of the Hermann-Grima and Gallier Historic Houses, I would like to thank Fatima Shaik for speaking with us this evening. For information on the upcoming lectures in the Gallier Gathering series, please visit our website, hgghh.org, or follow us on social media. We're up on Facebook and, Meta and Instagram. Note that we will be taking a break in February because our traditional time slot of the second Wednesday of every month happens to be Ash Wednesday and Valentine's Day all at once. So we're skipping that one. We're going to be closed, in fact, from Thursday before through Ash Wednesday. So if you're planning to come to the museum soon, get it done before then or after. But we'll be back in March with a book discussion night. Instead of a lecture, the book title will be announced very soon. And I would like to once again thank our fantastic speaker this evening and thank you, our audience, for your continued support of our museum. We look forward to seeing you at our next Gallier gathering. All
Thank you,
right.
Amy. It was good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks. Bye-bye.